last 16 races, only 45 points. That is just a lousy effort. Isha, Red Bull 2025, do they have an uphill battle against McLaren, Ferrari, and I'll even throw in Mercedes as well?
Yes, Joe, I definitely think so. If McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes are able to maintain the pace that they had in the later half of the season, and if they're able to improve on it, Red Bull is certainly going to have a tough time winning the constructors, and I think even the driver standings it could be. And as you mentioned, a big factor in that is also Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez is, as we saw today, he also DNF'd. It's really difficult to hope or think that Red Bull could maybe win the constructors next season, given that Max Verstappen's the only one scoring the majority of the points. And then you have teams like McLaren and Ferrari where you're going to have both drivers who are very capable of scoring points, and with Mercedes as well. So I think that Red Bull is certainly going to have a tough time next season. Um, if McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes are able to keep up the pace they had this season, if they're able to go into the start of the season with this pace, because we know, as Ben pointed out earlier, that especially with McLaren, they start off the season a little bit tough, and then they build their way up throughout the rest of the races. But I think the start of the season is going to be key for these three teams if they are looking to beat Red Bull once again.
Joe, that was an incredible way of putting it there. I didn't realize just how badly Checo had the last 2/3 of the season here. And forgive me, I'm just kind of flustered because I'm trying to do the math in my head here and make sure. So Imola was round 7. He finished 8th there. After that race, he was on 107 points. He finishes with 152. So yeah, that's the last 15 races, 45 points. So he averaged 3 points a race for basically 2/3 of the season here. That is unbelievable in a season where Max Verstappen marched away with his 4th championship. I mean, it's unacceptable, to be quite frank. And listen, nobody's been a bigger defender of Sergio Perez. I mean, I picked him to finish 2nd in the standings again this year at the start of the season because he did that last year, even though he had some troubles and some difficulties, some ups and downs in 2023. He ultimately got the job done, ultimately gave Red Bull their first ever 1-2 finish in the driver's standings. And, looked like he was well on his way to doing that again this year. He had a runner-up in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Obviously, Max had the issue in Australia. Checo was back in 5th, but then came back with 2 more podiums in Japan and China, and then a 4th place in Miami. And then really after that, the wheels just fell off there. He was never even really close to a podium finish again in a season where Max Verstappen was still maybe not as dominant as he was the last couple of years, but still capable of winning races on most given weekends here throughout the Formula One season. So to answer the question, forgive me again, I'm just, hadn't thought of it that way, but it's a stunning way to look at it. And it really puts into perspective just how poor Checo's form was here. I mean, he can't be the 2nd driver next year. There's no way around it. I know I think finally for the first time today, this weekend, he acknowledged, we'll talk about it. We'll come to a decision here in the coming days and weeks. But, he says he's got a contract. Yeah, the only thing that I could maybe think of is Max Verstappen pulls Nico Rosberg and shocks the world and says, you know what, I really have had enough on board. I want to go do something else, whether that's iRacing or sports car endurance racing or whatever. If he does walk away, which I believe there's a less than 0.1% chance of that happening, maybe Red Bull says, we can't have 2 rookie drivers, or at least 2 rookie drivers within the senior team. I know they could promote, Sonoda's been there for a few years now at RB. Maybe we need a veteran in the paddock. Maybe Checo could be that guy. That's the only way I see Checo keeping his seat, is if Max doesn't have the number 1 seat next year. And again, I think the odds of Max walking away at this point are slim to none. So, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But, if they do somehow, some way retain Checo Perez, if he can't find a way to rediscover that form from the last couple of years before this one, I think you can pretty much kiss the Constructors' Championship goodbye. I think we have 3 very strong teams. I'm very excited to see what Mercedes can do now that George Russell is going to be the undisputed number 1. We'll see what Kimi Antonelli can do as a rookie. But McLaren and Ferrari, I'm sure, are going to be coming back as strong as ever. It's going to be an uphill battle for sure, even regardless, I think, of who's in that 2nd car. And if it's Checo again, I think it's going to be very difficult for me to envision any possible way, unless there's a miraculous turnaround, that he could, help them win the Constructors' Championship.
On the post-race show for Formula One, Will Buxton predicted Liam Lawson will be alongside Max Verstappen.
I don't know. I think Lawson's got a lot of potential, but I mean, what would Yuki Tsunoda think of that? This is a guy that's he's been in this team for 4 years now, and you're going to take a guy who has a couple of fill-in appearances and less than half of a full season's worth of races, and say he's the guy ahead of somebody who's been there for multiple years now and has had some strong runs. I feel like if anybody's more deserved, not to say that Lawson isn't going to get there eventually and doesn't have that potential, but if you're going to promote somebody next year, I don't understand how Yuki couldn't be that guy.
It's going to be so interesting to see how this all develops with Red Bull, because I feel with Sergio Perez, he was brought onto Red Bull because he had such a good final year at, I believe it was Racing Point. Well, it was the Force India where he got the win. Oh, he was on his way out. Well, he lands with Red Bull, gets wins, second place last year. This year, this is not that same Sergio Perez. This is beyond bad. I mean, it almost started to feel just like you just knew it was just, what is he going to mess up this week? From last week, not going with the light turn green at the end of pit road. This week, someone could say it was out of his control to contact and crashing out. But again, it just, I think, really sums up what's been a lousy season.
Yeah, and Joe, I want to correct the record here. Forgive me. Like I said, it's been a long season, and that fact took me by surprise. I can't do math in my head right now, but 24 minus 7 is 17. So in 17 races, he only scored 45 points. I mean, it's just, it's an astonishing way of looking at it. And like I said, I think the status quo at the very least cannot be what Red Bull walks into 2025 with. But Checo, again, he says he has a contract. Maybe the team could use him as a simulator driver or a reserve role, or an ambassador for the company or whatever. But he cannot be the number 2 driver of the senior team next year. There's just no way around it.